Hello kids, feeling sleepy? I'm your host, Mr. Creepy. Don't fall into the wishing well. Listen to my stories from hell. Ghosts in the afterlife. The werewolf who chomped his wife. A headless dentist on a ATV. The chicken corpse haunting KFC. Ever seen a vampire on a plane? A zombie slurping brains? While you're in your bedroom smoking Indo, didn't you notice the ghoul at your window? Sit back and relax your bones. Get onto your laptops or your phones. The YouTube address FYI is Mr. Creepy's Time to Die. Bad evening. I'm your host, Mr. Creepy. Tonight's story is about a man named Charlie. Poor lad has multiple personality disorder. But we here at Mr. Creepy's Time to Die think he's good people. I had moved to Hollywood to try my hand at acting. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so all I could afford was a place at an old apartment complex. Off of Colfax? Yeah. Even though it wasn't really in a good neighborhood, it was at least close to bus stops and the metro rail. I would go to auditions for acting jobs and commercials when I could. But most of the time, like so many other aspiring actors, I worked a day job as a waiter, hoping for a night shift so that I could audition during the day. After a while of basically getting nowhere with my acting career, I contemplated quitting so many times. But I knew I would regret it if I didn't at least give it my all, so I continued to gut it out. I had been so focused on making it as an actor that all I basically did was work to go on auditions. I didn't even have time for friends or dating. The truth is, despite wanting to become an actor, I had always been socially awkward with a bit of social anxiety as well. I guess acting was an outlet for me because it allowed me to be somebody else. And when I was acting, all the anxiety and insecurity would go away. It was definitely a weird dynamic, but it just worked for some reason. I'd of course call back home when I could, even though I didn't have a lot of friends or family either. But like I said, I was too busy focusing on my career. I was so busy, in fact, that after living at the apartment complex for several months, I had never even really met any of my neighbors. I would see some of them come and go during the day, and I would even greet a few of them when we passed each other outside our apartments. But for the most part, we all just kept to ourselves. There was a married couple that lived next door that I eventually grew to know, though. They, however, had no idea who I was. You see, the walls of this apartment complex were so thin that I would sometimes hear the conversations the couple next door would have, especially late at night as I lay in my bed. As the months went by, I would learn that they were a married couple. The man's name was Charlie, the woman's Lenore. The man had a day job doing landscaping. The woman was a lounge singer at some bar. Even though the man had a fixed schedule, the woman would usually go to work late in the day, which made sense since she worked at a bar. Despite having lived in the complex for months, I had never crossed paths with either of them. I would, however, see them from my window time to time, leaving and returning to their apartment. But like I said, I was more focused on my own life. Even though I wasn't proud of it, eavesdropping on the couple's conversation was the closest thing I had to having any kind of social life since moving here. I didn't mean to be so nosy, but it was just too difficult to ignore listening in on them sometimes. Most of the conversations were the typical conversations a couple would have. They talked about their days, work, money, family back home, friends, dinner, what movies and shows they were going to watch on TV. And I have to admit, it was a little comforting to hear them laugh and be happy. In a way, they started to become my close friends. Unfortunately, after several months of listening in on their conversations here and there, I began to notice one day how increasingly hostile they had become. Charlie had started to grow more and more suspicious of Lenore. He accused her of cheating on him. But despite Lenore denying the accusation, Charlie didn't believe her. They would continue to argue during various times of the day, before and after work, for the next few weeks. Some of the arguments would get so heated, I almost felt the need to call the cops. What was once a couple I sought comfort in listening to once in a while had become a tragic and a nightmare of a relationship. Because of how uncomfortable their situation had become, I actually started to sleep with earplugs. It was too painful for me to listen to them. Then one night, while I was getting ready to go to bed, I began to hear them arguing again. But this argument was even more intense than the previous ones. Charlie told Lenore that he had actually parked outside the bar where she worked. He then told her that he saw her leave the bar early to meet a man at a hotel. My heart sank upon hearing this, but like the other times before, Lenore would adamantly deny the accusation and tell Charlie that she was not cheating on him. But Charlie wasn't having any of it. He began screaming at her and calling her all sorts of ugly names and slurs. Lenore could do nothing but plead for Charlie to calm down, but it wasn't working. I actually started to get nervous as the sound of Charlie's yelling grew more and more aggressive. I had no idea what he was capable of doing, and just when I thought I had no choice but to call the cops, all of a sudden, I started to hear what sounded like a struggle. That's when I carefully pressed my ear to the wall, trying to figure out what was happening. But the next thing I knew, I heard what could only be described as the sound of somebody trying to breathe or speak, and among that sound, I could hear Charlie softly saying, "I'm sorry. You left me no choice." My eyes grew wide, thinking if Charlie was actually doing what I thought he was doing. Was he really trying to kill Lenore? I thought to myself. But as I continued to listen, the sound of struggle eventually stopped, and all I could hear after was the sound of Charlie weeping. Shortly after, in an anguished-sounding tone, Charlie would continue to repeat the words,
"You made me do this. I'm so sorry. I loved you."
As I was listening to a clearly distraught Charlie, I had suddenly become overwhelmed with dread as I realized that it had been a while since I've heard Lenore say anything. The only thing I would hear next is the sound of Charlie trying to move something. There was then commotion in the distance as he started doing something at the farther end of the apartment. Fearing something horrible may have just happened, I quickly rushed to my phone and dialed 911. I told the operator about what I had heard, but wasn't sure of the exact circumstances. After being told to wait for authorities to arrive, I hid in my dark bedroom, hoping to not attract any attention. But just a few minutes later, I would hear Charlie's front door open as he left. Against my better judgment, I looked through the crack of my bedroom window. To my horror, from the outside of my living room window, I could see somebody trying to stare through space between the blinds. Instinctively, I quickly recoiled and continued to hide. Fortunately, moments later, I would hear what sounded like a car leaving. The cops would arrive a few minutes later, and after talking to me to get an idea of the situation, they would eventually break into Charlie and Lenore's apartment shortly after. Unfortunately, after looking inside, it was clear nobody was home. They did state that there were signs that there may have been a struggle, but as far as personal belongings, all of Charlie's and Lenore's stuff seemed to be in place. So despite both of them being gone, none of their stuff, by the looks of it, had been packed. Just as I thought I might have to spend the night in a motel for my own safety, a few hours later, the cops would inform me that Charlie had actually been found a few miles away at a wooded area, looking like he had just been shoveling dirt earlier. Even though they couldn't provide me any further details, I was at least relieved that I would be safe. I would learn the following day that since Charlie and Lenore's apartment was at the end of the complex, I was really the only one who had heard the disturbance. Some of my neighbors also didn't really speak English, so it's no wonder why there was a lack of awareness of the situation. As traumatizing as the incident was, I tried my best to put my mind on work and just focus on what I had to. But not more than 2 days had passed that a detective had come by to update me on what was going on. Charlie had actually been committed to a psychiatric hospital. When they had found him that night, he had confessed to killing his wife Lenore. I was distraught after hearing this, but the detective continued to tell me that when Charlie had led police officers to the spot where he supposedly buried Lenore, they found nothing but a garbage bag that had a blonde wig, dress, and high heels inside. It was distressing to hear that they had not found Lenore's body yet, so I asked if they had any idea where Lenore could possibly be. And that's when the detective would tell me something that would shock me to my core. He told me that there was no Lenore. Charlie had made her up. She was nothing but a figment of his imagination. After doing forensics of the apartment, they found nothing but Charlie's DNA. They found no evidence of Charlie ever being married, nor did they find any evidence of Lenore even existing. Charlie's psychiatrist had actually been contacted after he was brought in, and she confirmed that he was being treated for a multiple personality disorder. While he did work for a landscaping business, he did moonlight as a singer at an establishment that was part bar and part theater. Charlie had been suffering from mental illness all his life, but had the ability to lead a normal life as long as he took medication. Apparently, however, he had gotten off the medication a year ago, and his condition slowly deteriorated. Of course, upon hearing this revelation, I was truly and utterly shaken. I couldn't believe that this whole time, what I thought was a conversation between a married couple next door was actually just Charlie talking to himself in 2 voices. Thinking back, I started to realize that I never did see Charlie and Lenore leave and return at the same time. And the wig and the clothing the cops had described finding in the bag did awfully sound a lot like how Lenore looked. As shocking as the news was, I was at least relieved that nobody had in fact been murdered. But I never truly did recover from the whole experience. I actually moved back home a few years later, leaving my dreams of Hollywood behind. Even to this day, I still feel sad for Charlie, because in his mind, he really did murder Lenore. Mr. Creepy here. Friends, we don't care what you thought of tonight's horror story. If you don't stab the like button and slash the subscribe bell, this will happen to you.
No! No! No, not my leg!